longer knocks at the doors in Calatin as it scratches. As if it remembers the fingers that once reached for the threads, the villagers still whisper, but only when the oil lamps are low, and only when the dessert sings louder then. Their fear, they speak of prayer rugs, not like the ones found in markets or mosques, but woven with such reverence, such disturbing care, that to kneel upon them felt like laying one's forehead to flesh. They called them namazi rugs. For a brief season, they lined the floor of the village mosque, stitched in silence by a weaver who rarely spoke and blinked too slowly. At first, the worshippers praised the artistry, the colors, the way the patterns pulled the eye inward like spirals into memory. Then someone recognized a lip, another, a familiar curve in the brow, a birthmark they had seen on their brother's cheek, now missing for weeks, and the murmurs began, of the weaver working by candlelight, of livestock going quiet near his window, of rugs that sometimes moved ever so slightly when the muezzin called the dawn prayer. One morning, an old woman swore she saw a face in the corner rug open its stitched eyes. She never returned to the mosque again. Now, the building is gone, swallowed by sand, erased from maps and memory. But the rugs, they were never buried. Some say one of them still breathes. Some say it still prays. You are listening to the Withered Ledger. But ask yourself this: what if the holiest thing in your home was watching you pray? The road to Calatin as wound like a forgotten prayer, carved between dying hills and half-buried stones, where every gust of wind dragged more sand across the past than it revealed. For 3 days, the traveler rode in silence, a leather-bound journal pressed to his chest, eyes set on a village that appeared on no recent map, yet lived in the margins of every book on ancient crafts. His name was Darvish Amin, a scholar of sacred artistry, commissioned by the Shah's cultural ministry to trace the origins of rare weaving patterns said to hold divine energy. He arrived at dusk, when the sun was awound on the horizon, leaking red light across the clay homes of Calatin as no children ran to greet him, no merchants shouted, no smells of food carried on the air. Only silence waited at the edge of the path, stitched together by the occasional creak of wood and the soft hiss of wind through broken shutters. An old man met him at the village edge, eyes clouded, spine bent not by age, but by stories too heavy to retell. He handed Darvish a note. Nothing written, just a name pressed into the parchment. By fingernail, Bahram, the weaver. Darvish followed the direction pointed by the old man's trembling hand, past narrow alleys and shuttered windows, until he reached a house that leaned slightly to the left, as if listening. A single lantern flickered behind the curtain, its light too still, too golden. He knocked once, then twice, before the door opened without sound. The man who stood inside wore robes the color of dried blood, his hands stained faintly with dye or something deeper. His eyes were dark, but not unkind, and his voice, when it came, felt like the last whisper before a scream. "You are the one who seeks the sacred knots," Bahram said, not as a question, but as if he had already read it in a dream. Darvish nodded and was welcomed in. The interior was colder than expected, yet the air smelled of roses and burnt fabric. Rugs were everywhere, draped over shelves, rolled tight in corners, hung from the ceiling like quiet guardians. Each was a different shape, but the same in spirit. Patterns that coiled and folded, pulled the eye inward like a maze without an end. Bahram served tea without sugar, motioning for Darvish to sit on one of the folded rugs near the hearth. The seat felt soft, almost too soft, as if it responded to his weight in places where it should not have. They spoke little. Bahram asked no questions, offered no stories. But when he turned to stoke the fire, Darvish noticed something on the wall behind him. A tapestry, unlike the others. It was smaller, but richer in color, with a central knot that resembled a closed eye, bulging slightly from the surface. He blinked, and it was gone, or had changed, or was never there. That night, Darvish was given a small room at the back of the house, where the window faced nothing but rock and sky. The sheets smelled of sandalwood. The pillow was hard, and somewhere in the floorboards beneath, a faint rhythm pulsed, too slow to be mechanical, too irregular to be wind. He chalked it up to fatigue, until he heard it again, just before sleep. A sound like distant weeping, not loud, not near, but soaked into the very frame of the home. He rose, candle in hand, and walked the hallway barefoot, the cold tiles numbing his toes. He passed a closed door that had not been there earlier, or perhaps he had missed it. From behind it, the weeping grew slightly louder, as if the wood absorbed some of it and let only the thinnest threads escape. Darvish did not open it. Not that night. The next morning, Bahram was already awake, seated cross-legged before a loom that looked older than the house itself. He worked in silence, his hands moving with eerie grace. No yarn was visible, and yet the rug beneath his fingers grew longer with every breath. Darvish approached, staring at the patterns, forming, not geometric, not floral, but organic, vein-like. "I dream the designs," Bahram murmured, not looking up. "They come with faces." Darvish asked which texts he followed, which lineage of craftsmanship, which tribe or master had taught him. Bahram only smiled. "Some gifts are not taught, but remembered," he said. As the day stretched on, Darvish explored the home, moving from rug to rug, sketching patterns in his journal, but avoiding touching them now. Too many felt warm, not just sun-warmed, but radiating a subtle heat, the kind that comes from breath or blood. He stepped into a storage room, dimly lit by slats in the wall, and found a rolled carpet leaning in the corner. Its ends were bound tightly with a silken rope, but something about the shape disturbed him, the way it curved, as if bent around invisible limbs. He reached out, hand trembling, and placed his palm on it. Warm, not surface warm, deep. He backed away, nearly knocking over a stool, and when Bahram appeared in the doorway, his smile was wider than before. "Some things remember being touched," he said. That evening, Darvish tried to speak with the villagers, walking alone to the mosque square, where a well had long since dried and a stray cat lit the stone for moisture. He passed 3 men seated in a circle, but when he approached, they fell silent. When he mentioned the weaver, one of them spat into the dust, the other made the sign of warding. "He prays with what should be buried," the eldest man whispered, and then stood to leave. The others followed without looking back. Darvish returned to Bahram's home unsettled, unsure of what he had seen, what he was seeing. That night, the weeping returned, louder now. Closer, he walked again, candle trembling, to the door he had passed before. This time, he pressed his ear to the wood, breathing, slow, labored, but unmistakably human. He turned the knob, but it was locked from within. The next morning, Bahram offered no explanations, only more tea and a peculiar smile. Darvish declined both. Instead, he found himself drawn to the rug beneath Bahram's loom, the newest one, nearly finished. It showed no face yet, only strange threads of flesh tone woven through deep crimson. But when Darvish leaned closer, he saw something beneath the pattern, a curve, a shadow, a suggestion of lips. The knot at the corner pulsed. Once, he stumbled back, heart hammering. "Is it real?" he asked, though he already knew. Bahram's hands did not stop weaving. "All prayer must come from the body," he said. "The purer the offering, the louder the echo." Darvish did not sleep that night. He sat by the window, watching the wind drag sand across the hills. From his position, he could see the edge of the village, the path that had brought him in, but he did not walk it. He could not. The rugs whispered now, not in words, but in patterns that shifted when not watched. He closed his journal, stood slowly, and walked once more to the storage room. The bound carpet still stood in the corner. He touched it again. This time, it shuddered, and from inside, something exhaled. The next day began with no sunlight. The sky above Calatinaz was gray and thin, like parchment stretched afar. Darvish woke with the weight of something unsaid pressing against his chest, as if the house itself had laid upon him in the night. The walls creaked with breath, not age, and the air held the scent of rosewater and rot. He found Bahram already seated at the loom, fingers moving slowly, reverently, as if praying through touch, not voice. "You could not sleep," Bahram said, without turning. Darvish did not answer. Instead, he stood in the doorway, studying the man whose hands birthed rugs that breathed. "You spoke of dreaming your designs," Darvish said, voice dry. Bahram nodded. "Not all dreams are mine," he whispered. "Some are sent by those who are no longer speaking, but still wish to be heard." He looked up for the first time that morning, Would you like to hear one?" he asked. Darvish hesitated, then nodded. Bahram rose, walked to the far wall, and removed a rolled tapestry held by a rusted nail. He spread it slowly, careful not to let the fabric touch the floor. It was smaller than the others, woven and cool. Shades of violet and ash, the edges frayed, the center bulging ever so slightly. "It was the first one," he said, "the first rug made with remembrance. Her name was Madhab." Bahram said, his voice softer now. "She used to bring me almonds wrapped in cloth every Friday before the call to prayer. She had a smile that made even shadows step back." Darvish listened in silence, his eyes tracing the spiral patterns within the rug. Bahram continued, "She lost her son in the Southern War," he said, "then her husband to grief. She was all alone. And yet she still prayed for others. She prayed for me, even when I had no voice left to pray for myself." His hands trembled slightly as he smoothed the rug's corner. "One night she stopped coming, and the village barely noticed. But I remembered, I waited, I listened, and she answered in a dream." Bahram looked at Darvish. "She asked to be remembered, not mourned, so I gave her what prayer could not." Darvish stepped closer. The center of the rug had a tension to it, as if it were stretched over something not flat, not cloth. He reached out, but Bahram grabbed his wrist before he could touch it. "Some grief is too raw for the fingers," he whispered. "You must see with the breath, not the hand." That night, Darvish sat in the guest room, writing in his journal. His notes were no longer academic. The patterns made less sense the more he studied them. He wrote of Madhab, of the weeping sounds, of the storage room carpet that exhaled, then paused. He remembered something Bahram had said the day before, about all prayer coming from the body. What did that mean? He rose again, candle in hand, and moved through the house with slower steps. He entered a room lined wall to wall with rolled carpets, arranged like scrolls, each labeled only by a single stitch of colored thread near the edge: blue, red, brown, yellow. No names, no dates, just a color for memory. He chose one at random, unrolled it halfway. The light of the candle caught something unusual in the weave, a sharpness, a glint. He leaned closer, squinting, and there, embedded deep within the threadwork, a curve of cartilage, too perfectly shaped to be plant or wood. It looked like the outer edge of an ear. He dropped the rug and stepped back, heart pounding. He unrolled another, then another, a fragment of bone, a thread that looked far too much like tendon. One rug had a faint smell of iron, not from dye, but something much older, something that had once pumped through veins. And then he saw it, near the far wall, a small rug, folded in on itself. As he passed it, something twitched beneath the fabric. He froze, turned, and lowered the candle. The twitch came again, this time clearly, like a breath trying to push through layers of silk. He knelt, slowly, and lifted the corner. A face stared back at him, not stitched, not painted, but real. The skin was dry, pale, the lips sealed with golden thread, the eyes fluttering beneath half-shut lids. It was still alive. Darvish staggered back, the candle nearly falling from his hand. The breathing slowed, then stopped, and the rug stilled. He ran to Bahram, found him by the hearth, humming softly. "There's a woman inside that rug," Darvish gasped. Bahram said nothing, only poured tea. "You buried her alive," Darvish shouted. But Bahram raised a hand, gently. "I did not bury her," he said. "I carried her prayer where no one else would." Darvish left the house before sunrise. The village still slept, though no sleep could remain after what he had seen. He walked to the mosque, old and silent, its minaret cracked, its door hanging open like a broken jaw. Inside, it was empty, save for the rugs, dozens of them, laid across the floor, each one hauntingly intricate, beautiful beyond logic, and each one, now unmistakably familiar. He stepped forward, heart pounding, and saw what he had not seen before: the lips, the eyelids, the ridges of human skin hidden inside spirals of sacred design. He ran to the prayer platform, looking for someone, anyone, who could witness this with him. And there, sitting beneath the crumbling arch of the mihrab, was the imam, old, frail, with glassy eyes and trembling hands. He sat cross-legged on a rug far newer than the rest. Darvish stared, horrified. The pattern was red and cream, but the center bulged slightly, a shape, a rise, like the curve of a torso beneath it. "Do you know what you sit upon?" Darvish asked, voice shaking. The imam looked up slowly. "Yes," he said. "She prays still, even now. She never missed a dawn." He placed a hand gently over the rug's heart. "And now she never will." Darvish backed away. "You allowed this," he whispered. The imam gave a small, solemn nod. "In this village, where no one listens," he listened. "And when the soul cannot climb to God, sometimes the flesh must lie flat to carry it." Darvish turned and fled the mosque. The call to prayer had not yet begun, but the rugs were already breathing. As he stepped into the street, the sky was beginning to change, a pale light rising from the east, and with it, he heard it again, faint, muffled, but present, the sound of voices. Dozens of them, whispering in unison, buried beneath layers of silk and skin. They were praying. He stood in the middle of the road, paralyzed, and behind him, in the dark halls of the mosque, the dawn rose and the rugs began to stir. The tea was not bitter, not even warm, but it was made with herbs that no scholar should have tasted in that house, not under that roof. Petru sat with shaking hands, the cup resting between his palms like a relic, not a beverage. The weaver poured it himself, the steam from his breath merging with the tea's scent, sharp and floral, but strange, to floral, to fragrant, as if it wanted to mask something beneath. The fire crackled in the corner, but Petru could not remember when it was lit. He blinked, then blinked again, and the weaver's face seemed to float in and out of the corners of the room, like cloth being drawn on an invisible loom. He tried to speak, but his tongue felt like wet rope in his mouth. Limp and swollen, "You carry questions in your eyes," said the weaver earlier, not as a sentence, but like a blessing, like an absolution he had no right to give. Petru tried to stand, but the world tilted. A thick wave rose in his stomach, but it was not nausea. It was something else, a dragging, an anchoring, as if the bones of the house were pulling him down through the chair, through the floor, into whatever waited in the dark below. And the weaver began to hum, the same tune, always the same tune. As he pulled a carpet frame from behind a curtained wall, a half-finished rug stretched tight across the wooden frame, its edges bleeding in color, but not just color. There was something behind the threads, beneath them, within them, a shape, a mouth, moving, whispering. Petru's pulse stuttered, his legs refused him, and in the dim haze, he watched the weaver sit on the floor, hands methodical, lips sealed, eyes closed as if in prayer. The needle moved like breath, long, deliberate, aching strokes, threading through the fibers with elegance and something almost holy. And then, with no words, no preamble, Petru's mind was pulled backwards into something not his own, not of his blood, not of his birth. It was the weaver, years ago, but not yet a weaver, just a child with blood on his hands and a song on his lips. The memory began in dust. The village was smaller then, and poorer. Mothers dragged their water from stone wells, and boys played with bird bones in the dirt, pretending they were soldiers or saints. And he, the boy who would become the weaver, did not speak for the first 6 years of his life, not because he could not, but because he believed words were things too fragile to be handed over freely. But the moment burned into him was not of childhood games or lost teeth. It was the day they took his mother into the square and bound her, wrists to the post. She had stolen bread, they said, for a widow, a friend, an unseen child perhaps. But punishment was not death, but it was close enough. They cut her skin methodically, not to kill, but to mark, to shame. Each slice meant to echo through the bones of every woman watching. But what stayed with him was not her scream, it was her prayer. As her flesh was opened, she whispered the name of God over and over, until her voice was hoarse and dry like autumn leaves crushed in the fist. He remembered the blood pooling at her feet, the soil drinking it like thirst returned, and yet her eyes never dimmed. They burned through the pain, focused on something far beyond the crowd, far beyond even the punishment. When she died days later, not from the wounds but from infection, he took the cloth she wore and buried it with his own hands, tying it to the base of an olive tree outside the village. He returned every day to pray beside it, believing some of her was still inside the fibers, some of her breath, some of her voice, and when he began weaving years later, it was not to make art or to sell or to display. It was to remember, to bind the sacred with the ordinary, to pull flesh into fabric and soul into thread. The first time he took a rib bone from a corpse, he wept as he carved it, not from guilt, but from awe. He shaped it with stones, then sharpened it until it pierced cloth like a fang. He called it fasting, not in the sense of food, but of absence, of withdrawal from the world, of pulling pain through the eye of a needle. Petru stirred, gasping, the vision leaving him. The tea's haze had not lifted, but something in the air had changed. He saw now, the needle glinting in the firelight, its tip smoother than steel, its curve like a claw. It was not made of metal. It was a rib, human, polished, worn, preyed upon. The weaver's hands moved without thought. His head bowed, eyes closed, and the rhythm of the needle, in and out, was like breath, like penance, like a wound opening and healing in the same instant. The rug before him was almost done, but something in it moved, a ripple, like a hand brushing against silk from the inside. Petru leaned closer, against the drugged pull of his own body, and saw it, a face, still alive. The eyes flickered, barely open, barely human. The mouth whispered something, not words, not exactly, but syllables soaked in desperation. The lips moved in prayer, and it was not a scream, not a plea, just worship, soft, obedient, like the mother years ago. The weaver did not look up. Each loop, each thread, each pass of the needle was a hymn, a sacrifice, a ritual perfected over time. He had fasted not in food, but in flesh, drawing from the body, offering pain as a tribute, and believing that every soul stitched into his rugs became closer to God. Petru felt a scream clawing up his throat, but it came out as a cough. His body refused him, still tethered by whatever was in the tea. He reached for his bag, but it was gone. He had been invited, welcomed, and now he was being prepared. The weaver began humming again. Petru looked to the window, but it was covered. The door was bolted, not locked, bolted, as if from within. He was not in a home, he was in a shrine where prayer did not rise with incense, but with blood. And the weaver, calm, barefoot, serene, held up the needle now as if it were a relic, and looked at Petru with eyes soft, almost apologetic. Not everyone prays with words, he might have said, if he believed in saying anything at all. Some prayers are woven, some are bled, some are fed to the needle, and this rug, this final one, was nearly finished, and there was only one space left, one whisper missing, one thread yet to bleed. Petru's vision blurred. The fire flickered, the needle gleamed, and the humming grew louder. The wind carried the smell of burnt spices and old linen as the scholar stepped back into the weaver's home, or what remained of it. The wooden floor sagged in the middle, as if trying to forget something buried beneath it, and above him, dried lavender swung from the rafters like inverted corpses, weeping dust. He did not knock this time. No need to announce himself to an empty house. The doors no longer resisted him. They had begun to rot from the hinges inward, softening like mouths that had been forced shut too long. The scholar moved slowly now, his feet cautious over the woven mats that curled like animal skin, each one different, each one whispering, but one in the corner, was breathing. The rug lay flat, but rose with each exhale, the way a dying man's chest might heave when alone. It did not flinch when he approached. It only opened. Its seam, once tight, once beautiful, tore down the middle, and from it came no dust or thread, but a sound, a wordless sound like drowning in one's own voice. Then it spoke. Please. The scholar dropped to his knees. The voice came not from a mouth, but from the rug's entire being. The threads shook, the fibers contorted, the calligraphy twisted inward, trying to shield something inside itself. Please kill me. The voice was not male or female. It was not human, but it had known prayer and pain and now regret. The scholar's hands trembled as he placed them over the woven surface. You are alive. No. The voice said, I am trapped. The scholar closed his eyes. He had read about this once, in a banned text kept behind iron in the Almirage library. That prayer, when forced through agony, can bind a soul to the place it was last heard, especially if that place was not meant to receive it. And this rug, this prayer mat, had heard the final prayer of the weaver's daughter, not with mercy, but with hunger. The scholar remembered her now, remembered the way she vanished, the way her father refused to name her death. The threads were her veins, the knots her joints, the color, the deep rusted red. Her final scream, "I will free you," he whispered. But the rug screamed in response, "No, you do not understand," it said. "It is not just me, the others, they are listening." He looked around. Every rug in the room had gone still, but watching, he felt them narrowing. Around him, tightening the air like pages in a holy book pressed shut. Still, he could not let her remain this way. He stood and reached for the brass knife on the weaver's bench. It was dull, bent at the tip, crusted in wax and ink, not fit for sacrifice, but maybe enough for mercy. He bent down, whispered a verse over the blade, one of release, one of return, and pressed it into the breathing seam of the rug. At once, the room convulsed. The windows shattered inward, the walls cracked like dried mud, and from the threads, something poured, not blood, not spirit, but sound, voices, thousands of them, prayers unfinished, apologies whispered too late. They filled the air like soot, and then the fire began. It started at the corner of the room where the eldest rug lay, the one with gold stitching and the name of God misspelled deliberately. It burst into flame as if the prayer within had been denied too violently. The fire did not rise. It crawled, slow, patient, devouring rug by rug like pages being torn from a forbidden book. The scholar screamed for water, for help, but the village had gathered outside. They watched from the street, unmoving, faces blank, as if what they saw was not a fire, but a long overdue correction. One of them, an old man with a cracked spine and yellowed eyes, whispered, "Let it burn. It remembers too much." Inside, the scholar tried to carry the breathing rug out, but it screamed again. "No," it said. "If I leave, they follow. You must stay. The fire must end here." The flames licked the walls now, eating through the shelves of unused dye, of unfinished mats, of books sewn into fabric, of faith turned into fiber. The roof sagged, smoke poured from the windows, but the villagers did not move. They only watched, as though waiting for something specific. And then, silence. The roof collapsed inwards, burying the workshop in a blanket of sparks and blackened wood. The fire roared once more, then sighed and died. Ash fell like snow, coating the street. The villagers turned away, one by one, returning to their homes with the silence of those who had buried too many memories. But in the soot, one rug remained, unburned. It sat at the very edge of the rubble, untouched by flame, its color unchanged, its threads still warm. The scholar stepped forward, coughing, his hands burned, eyes red. He bent to lift it, then stopped. The rug looked back, not metaphorically. It looked back to eyes sewn from thread and ash, opened where the calligraphy should have been, and they followed him every step he took away. The eyes followed. When he turned a corner, they blinked. When he reached the door of the mosque, they closed, then reopened. Inside the mosque, the air had changed. There were no rugs left, no cloth to kneel on, just bare stone and a circle of soot. The scholar knelt on the cold floor and prayed, not for redemption, not for forgiveness, but for understanding. Behind him, unseen but felt, the rug had followed. It sat quietly in the doorway, eyes open, watching, waiting. And when the scholar finished his prayer, he did not rise, because now the stone beneath him breathed too, and somewhere deep below, in the foundation of that mosque, something answered, not with words, but with thread, and the prayer that opened its eyes closed them again, but only for now. Decades passed, the village rebuilt, new stones stacked over old ash, new prayers whispered where old ones had been erased. Yet the scholar's body was never found. No grave marked his name, only a silence that lingered too long, like breath, caught in a throat. But then a journal surfaced, leather-wrapped and brittle, pages browned at the edges like they had been singed by fire or sorrow. It held entries that no one could quite explain, maps of dreams, descriptions of voices woven into patterns, and sketches of eyes that looked back. Final entry simply, read, "I only wanted to free what should never have been caged today in a faraway city." Inside the National Museum of Islamic History, One exhibit is never cold. Though the room is temperature controlled and untouched by sunlight, it remains mysteriously warm. As though a heartbeat pulses beneath the thread, visitors do not linger near it for long. Some say the rug exhales, others swear it shifts ever so slightly when backs are turned. One girl fainted beside it and whispered through trembling teeth. It is listening, the curator says. It is from an unnamed village, woven by a nameless artisan, recovered from a burned mosque, found unscorched among the cinders, its colors impossibly intact. People walk by it every day, admire the beauty, photograph the symmetry, but they do not kneel too close, and they never trace their fingers across the face that sometimes seems to appear in the corner, not until it blinks. You were listening to the Withered Ledger, a place for what history tries to bury. But tell me, if you looked close enough, if you really dared to kneel, would your own face be woven in? Would it be watching you already?